Princess Catherine was one of Russia's most ingenious women, but not for the reasons you might think. Married off unexpectedly to a man she didn't love, she quickly found an excuse to wander around Europe and live life to the fullest. So just how did she do it, and what made her so distinguished? This is her story. The woman who is more widely known to history as Princess Catherine Bagration was born on the 7th of December 1783 in the city of Naples in southern Italy as Catherine or Yekaterina Skavronsky. Her father was alleged to be Count Pavel Martinovich Skavronsky, a chamberlain of the Russian royal court and at the time of Catherine's birth, a diplomat of the Russian Empire to the Kingdom of Naples and Sicily. Her mother was Catherine or Yekaterina von Engelhardt. She was a niece of Prince Grigory Potemkin, for a time the most powerful figure in the Russian Empire, other than Empress Catherine the Great. Potemkin and his niece, Catherine's mother, engaged in a relationship for a time, and it has been speculated that young Catherine may have actually been Potemkin's illegitimate child. Regardless of her exact parentage, we do know that she grew up with high-level connections within the Russian nobility and prospered as a result. Young Catherine eventually ended up returning to Russia shortly after she was born and was raised at the court in St. Petersburg of Catherine the Great, who ruled the country down to 1796 after transforming Russia into one of Europe's great powers, and then Tsar Paul I down to 1801. This was a period of turmoil across Europe, as the French Revolution of 1789 had seen many of the continent's powers go to war with the French. However, despite these efforts to crush the French Revolution, powers like Austria, Britain and Prussia met with defeat after defeat to the French throughout the 1790s. For the time being, Russia looked on at the conflicts in Western and Central Europe without becoming too closely involved, but it would eventually have to take a strong stance, and when it did, it would impact on the lives of many Russian nobles like Princess Catherine. In 1800, when she was 16 years old, Catherine was wed to Prince Peter Bagration, a scion of a major Georgian royal line, the Bagrationi, who was in his mid-30s. Catherine's husband was a unique figure, and many viewed this as a strange match. For example, he was not an overtly handsome man or dashing figure. He was average height, thin with brown hair, and had a hooked nose that was the butt of many jokes in St. Petersburg, the Russian capital at the time. But Bagration was one of the great military figures of the age. He was one of the few individuals who managed to defeat one of Napoleon's armies on the field of battle and stop the French advance into Russia in 1807 at the end of the War of the Fourth Coalition. This earned him a great reputation in an age when Bonaparte was viewed in almost godlike terms by many Europeans as a man who simply could not be defeated in battle. Many Russians referred to Bagration as a result as the god of the army. His success against the French lay ahead of him when Catherine became his wife, but he had already undertaken many major military commands in Poland in the 1790s, and so Catherine was marrying into a major political dynasty at the Russian court. Yet, Catherine was against the union, and it is believed that she was in love with another courtier and general, Count Peter von der Pauwen. Nevertheless, the match was arranged by the higher-ups within the Russian government, and there was little she could do to refuse. The French-born general Louis-Alexandre Andro de Langeron stated the following regarding the union. Bagration married the young niece of the great Prince Potemkin. This rich and illustrious partner did not suit him. Bagration was a mere soldier, with the tone and manners of one, and he was extremely ugly. His wife was as white as he was black, and she was as beautiful as an angel, bright, the liveliest of beauties of St. Petersburg. She would not be happy with such a husband for long. This soon proved to be right, as the marriage was a failure, and Catherine and Peter would not have children, spending much of their married years together apart from one another. Although Catherine tried to make her marriage to Bagration work for several years after they were married in the autumn of 1800, over the next few years they drifted further and further apart. Eventually in 1805, she determined to unofficially separate from her husband, leaving Russia to travel across Europe during a period when Napoleon's domination of the continent was extending French rule all the way from Lisbon in the west to Poland in the east. She would spend much of the next decade and more travelling across Europe with a significant party of courtiers and servants who went to many of the continent's leading capitals. Catherine's years as the wandering princess, as she became euphemistically known, were aided by the political circumstances of these years. Although Napoleon had been at war with Russia until 1807, the Treaty of Tilsit effectively made peace between France and Russia, and with this both nations agreed to control mainland Europe between them, as Austria, Prussia and other states had been conquered by the French. This agreement made it possible between 1807 and 1812 for aristocrats like Princess Catherine to travel between cities like Moscow, Warsaw, Vienna, Berlin and Paris relatively unhindered. Hence, Catherine's itinerant life during these years was dependent on the political situation, and after the French invasion of the Russian Empire in 1812, her movements were briefly more restricted. Throughout these years, as she travelled across Europe and visited some of the continent's most preeminent courts, Catherine acquired a reputation for having an eclectic and peculiar character, as an individual who rejected many of the social norms of the time. Her husband spent years writing to her and trying to influence other individuals at the courts which he visited to help him convince her return to Russia and cease embarrassing him through her overtly independent behaviour. Catherine would have none of it and constantly rejected his implorations, using the excuse that she was ill and needed medical treatment only available abroad. As she travelled from city to city, she acquired a reputation for herself on other matters. Catherine, for instance, became known in Vienna, Paris and other metropolises as La Belle Ange Nue, which translates as the beautiful nude angel, a reference to her inclination for wearing revealing dresses and because of her sensuality. All of this culminated in several affairs as she traversed the continent. The most salacious involved a supposed relationship with Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, author of Faust, and the preeminent German author of the age. However, the most significant was unquestionably her relationship with Prince Clemens von Metternich, a figure who had risen first as the Austrian ambassador to Paris in the mid-1800s, to become the foremost Austrian statesman of the first half of the 19th century. With Metternich, Catherine would have her only child, a daughter named Marie Clementine, born in the autumn of 1810. For a time, Catherine settled in Vienna, where she turned her home into a distinctly pro-Russian, anti-Napoleonic salon. The princess constantly filled her home with rich and famous individuals, which she used to acquire vast amounts of political secrets. Catherine weaponized this knowledge in any way she could, and apparently Napoleon found her to be a serious political opponent. As Catherine continued to rack up debts, her husband grew irritated and even complained to his wife's mother of her extravagance. Yet, despite this, he was a generous man and continued to pay her bills. Catherine's husband died prematurely in 1812. That year, Napoleon invaded the Russian Empire in what was the biggest military campaign in modern European history up until that point. As one of his nation's foremost generals, Bagration was heavily involved in the defense of Russia, a campaign which eventually saw the Russians abandon Moscow and burn much of the city to the ground to prevent the French from using it as a base as the Russian winter set in. However, Bagration did not live to see these events out. He had preferred a strategy of confronting the French and their allies in a pitched battle before they ever reached Moscow. His efforts to do so saw the Russians meet the French at the Battle of Borodino on the 7th of September 1812, not far from Moscow. In an engagement which the French emerged victorious from and continued onwards to Moscow, Bagration was badly wounded. Due to a lack of treatment, gangrene set into the wound on his leg, and he eventually died 2.5 weeks later in Sima, aged 47. This left Catherine a widow and free to potentially remarry, but it would be many years before she did so. After his death, his belongings were searched, and among his papers a series of compromising letters were discovered. These show that the Grand Duchess, Catherine Pavlovna of Russia, the sister of Emperor Alexander I of Russia, was passionately in love with him. Some sources claim that they were lovers, and that as a result in the year 1800, Emperor Paul I of Russia forced Bagration to marry Princess Catherine to avoid future relations between Bagration and his daughter, though others state he largely ignored her advances, as he adored his wife Catherine. Catherine was one of the most prominent female figures at one of the most significant diplomatic and aristocratic gatherings of the 19th century. This took place in 1815 in Vienna. The Congress of Vienna, as it is typically known, was assembled towards the end of the Napoleonic Wars, as Bonaparte's grip on France and Europe collapsed. The goal of the conference was to redraw the maps of Europe after a quarter of a century of France's dominance of Western and Central Europe, but the Congress also became an opportunity for prominent members of the continent's royal families, governments and aristocrats to renew their acquaintances after years of discord. Catherine was central to social events here, while her lover Metternich emerged as the single most important diplomat in the negotiations. As a link between the Austrian government and the Russian imperial regime, Catherine played a significant part in allowing Metternich to negotiate successfully with Russia. Catherine's activities while in Vienna are infamous. She was, for instance, seemingly involved romantically with several individuals while in the Austrian capital, most notably Tsar Alexander I. This was not surprising. Europe's aristocracies and governments were not just settling the political landscape of Europe in 1815 at Vienna, they were also celebrating the end of Napoleon's dominance of Europe after 15 years of his rule, and a further 10 years of revolutionary war with France. Thus, many individuals arrived to Vienna with mistresses and trains of individuals in tow, with parties and banquets being held on an almost daily basis. For instance, the Duke of Wellington, the great victor over Napoleon in the Peninsular War in Spain and Portugal and at Waterloo, arrived to Vienna with the notorious French-Italian courtesan, and he was not alone in this. Given all of this, Catherine's activities there in 1815 fit within the prevailing context. In the years following the end of the Napoleonic Wars and the Congress of Vienna, Catherine settled in a mansion on the Rue de Faubourg Saint-Honoré in Paris. Here she led a sophisticated life in a city which would establish itself as the centre of the world culturally for the next century, though her activities were monitored over the years by the Russian government, which worried about her possible interactions with the authorities in Paris. Eventually, Catherine remarried. This was on the 18th of January 1830 to the British diplomat and political figure Sir John Hobart Caradoc, a man born in 1799 and over 15 years Catherine's junior. Much like her first union, Catherine was too rebellious to accept the oversight of her husband, and eventually she and John drifted apart and separated formally. Catherine lived to an old age in France and other parts of Western Europe, spending some of her time in northern Italy. Her later years were perhaps most noteworthy for the inheritance she received from her great-uncle Potemkin. This consisted of incredibly valuable collections of jewels and diamonds. She sold many of these in order to continue to fund her lifestyle in France and Italy, including numerous gemstones which ended up in the collections of some of Europe's most significant royal and aristocratic families. She eventually died in Venice in the early summer of 1857 at 73 years of age. She was buried in a cemetery in the Isola di San Michele, or the island of San Michele, which is a small island located in the main lagoon of Venice. Thank you everyone so much for watching this video on Princess Catherine Bagration. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you thought of her life down below in the comments, and if you have any other suggestions, also be sure to leave them down below in the comments. I hope you guys are subscribed and have notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.